for this live stream. Hey everyone, I think we are now live. This is the first, I believe, live streamed Gravitee YouTube and LinkedIn and across channels session that we have. So feel free to give us feedback in terms of the format and how this is kind of processed. I'm gonna give a few minutes or a couple of more seconds at least before we get started for people that are joining in late. So we'll make an introduction in a few seconds to myself and to Devian and what we will be covering this session. So Devian, I'm going to throw you a curveball. What did you have for breakfast? I know it's still early at your part of the world.
I actually didn't have breakfast.
Oh wow, yeah, you're like Alex.
Yeah, I was about to say I'm following Alex's lead in terms of like skipping breakfast until like 12 o'clock and just going straight to lunch. And we'll see how it works out.
Okay, so it's 1 minute past 4. So let's get started. So hey everyone, thanks for listening in, whether you're listening in live or you're replaying this sometimes in the future. This is a Gravitee quarterly product update session. We'll be looking at what has been released in Gravitee 3.20, which was released a few weeks ago as part of our Q4 release for 2022. I'm Linus Håkansson. I'm the Vice President of Product here at Gravitee, and I'm joined by Devian, who is our Solutions Engineer based in the US. So we will be taking you through why and the what of the update, as well as some exciting demonstrations by Devian. So 3.20, there was a lot of focus on what we call at Gravitee event-native API management. So event-native API management for us is a technology that allows organizations to unify the management of synchronous and asynchronous services and applications. So what we have been seeing at Gravitee is a big trend of organizations implementing event-driven architectures, whether it's a Kafka or a Solace or an MQTT server, and they want to, at the end of the day, expose that and control and secure and monitor also those type of event APIs, just as they were used to work with open API specification, documentation, security, governance, traffic shaping. They're looking to do the same with some of the use cases around asynchronous communication. And that is very much what Gravitee is focused on at the moment. So as part of our event-native API management capabilities, we provide this flexibility of what services you want to expose and how you want to expose them. So it's a complete flexible architecture in having webhooks on top of Kafka or REST on top of MQTT, like Devian will come on and show you a little bit later on. So it's a very exciting new product that we have built here at Gravitee, and we're excited to share some of those updates with you today. So we'll go through a new user interface that we released as part of 3.20. We go through what we call the Gravitee API definitions, and we talk a little bit about Kafka and MQTT specifically, how we are supporting those technologies with our gateway. Obviously, deployment architectures and microservices and cloud native is very important to Gravitee, and I'll be happy to walk you through, as well as Devian, our latest iteration of our Gravitee Kubernetes operator. We also have made a major improvement to our alert engine product, now going into a 2.0 version, so I'll speak a little bit about that. And then we'll round up with some new additions like the quality of service support and subscription message filtering. So Gravitee obviously have quite a few products in our portfolio. We have access management, we have API management, we have Cockpit, API Designer, and Alert Engine. As part of this 3.20 release, we have revisited and improved the user experience and navigation and UI for all of our products. So you'll find a much more consolidating and consistent kind of look and feel, as well as how you navigate in the different levels of the hierarchy and menu. So I think Devian will show you a little bit later on what that actually looks like in a live demonstration. So here's just an example of our Cockpit, access management, and API management products as part of our latest release. Okay, so what is a Gravitee API definition, and why is this latest work that we have been doing important? So a Gravitee API definition is basically the internal representation of what an API is in Gravitee. So it includes things like the name of the API, where you're exposing it, how you're securing it, what paths you're exposing, the documentation, all the metadata that goes with your API goes into an API definition, whether that's a JSON object or a YAML object to represent that underlying API representation. Then we obviously use the user interface to visualize and allow you to manage and update your APIs, change the icon, the documentation, where it listens on the gateway and so forth. At the moment, the general availability API definition of Gravitee is version 2.0. What we are moving to and why we're moving to that is 4.0. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned in the beginning, organizations increasingly have this need of managing not only synchronous APIs, but also asynchronous APIs. And we needed to look at ourselves and think, how can we make this definition as flexible as possible to meet the demands and use cases for the now and the future for both synchronous and asynchronous use cases and architecture. So the 4.0 API definition is there to be more aligned to also support event-driven architectures. So obviously the emergence of things like async APIs and cloud events and other specifications aimed towards event-driven architectures is something that we've looked at a lot to make sure that we are compliant and our definition is as close to both open API and async API as possible. So in a 2.0 or 2.0.0 API definition of Gravitee, it's very focused on request and response. But with 4.0.0, the new API definition, we also allow publish and subscribe type of architectures to be defined when you create a Gravitee API. So we have this concept of listeners and endpoints. So a listener could be things like webhooks, REST, HTTP GET, HTTP POST, SOAP, WebSocket, service and events, and so forth. While as endpoints is basically the upstream. So it could be REST, could be SOAP, could be Kafka, MQTT, and other type of event brokers. So this is where we're adding this flexibility to mix and match what your upstream data sources are and how you want to expose that as an API owner and as an API producer. And with API 4.0.0, you'll be able to do that. So what that enables us to do is to have the gateway not only proxying your traditional synchronous type of sources like REST or SOAP or GraphQL, but also other technologies that are not necessarily based on the HTTP protocol and not necessarily request response oriented. And two of the most popular ones that a lot of our customers are using is Kafka and MQTT. And why that is important is a lot of organizations are embracing event-driven architectures. And as I mentioned in the beginning, lifecycle management, access, discovery, protocol mediation, quite difficult for these up-and-coming event-driven architectures. And to expose these to internal users, to partners, to third parties, is not straightforward today. And that's what we're trying to address with the event-native platform of Gravitee. And a lot of those use cases, how you're exposing those services, include bridging between asynchronous and synchronous. So if you have a Kafka broker, an MQTT queue, or a Solas broker, whatever it might be, how can you make that available in a synchronous world using REST APIs, using webhooks, and so forth? So what we're releasing is Kafka and MQTT connectors. We have open source versions and we have advanced versions of those connectors. When you use them with the Gravitee Gateway, you can then select, how do I want to expose them? Do I want to expose them using webhooks, WebSocket, service and events, REST, whatever event-driven architecture or whatever synchronous architecture you may want to use? You can then ingest, retrieve, and stream messages from and to those topics and queues. And you can use policies and security as you're comfortable and used to with Gravitee to control the security, to control the access, to route between topics or queues or move between XML or JSON or whatever it might be, do rate limiting, throughput limiting. Now, as part of these advanced connectors that we're releasing, we're making sure that every customer would be able to connect to their specific flavor and security needs of MQTT and Kafka. So we're supporting the Confluent and IBM, for example, cloud solutions. We're supporting SASL Plain, M2LS, Scrum, OAuth bearer, basic authentication. Basically, any authentication that your gateway needs to do towards your event broker, Gravity's connectors can do that for you. So with that, enough of me talking about the Kafka and MQTT, and over to Devian that will be running us through an example of what this could look like.
Awesome. Appreciate that, Linus. So if you guys are able to see my screen at the moment, you'll see that we'll be situated within Postman. And the reason I'll be looking back and forth is because my screen is this way and then Postman is over here. But the first thing I want to point out is a couple of things that Linus actually talked through. This is going to be the API v4 definition that we're seeing here on the screen. And if you'll direct your attention to the entry points, which we've dedicated within the listener section right here, you'll be able to see that we are doing an HTTP post, as well as the endpoint groups that we've defined today as well. So we will be posting to MQTT broker, which is going to be leveraging HiveMQ. My gateway is starting in the background. The first step we're going to take is actually creating the API within Gravitee. So once I hit send, what's going to happen is we're going to see a 201 created at the bottom, and we'll get that information back of the API that's been started. And if I drag it up, we'll see that the API has now been created. I now have the API ID, which I would now take and paste into the API variable. The next step we're going to take is actually including a plan on the API itself. If you're familiar with Gravitee, you know that the APIs that you create typically are going to have a plan associated, so you'll have the ability to use them. This plan itself is going to take a couple different steps. It's actually going to create the plan and publish said plan on top of the API as well. What you'll notice with this one is we're actually going to include rate limiting. So as we go through this demonstration, I'm going to send data to the MQTT broker. That way we can start to understand these rate limiting that's situated on top of this API as well. So upon doing that, I'll click send one more time, and we'll see that plan is going to be published and placed onto the API. I'll take this, set this in the plan variable. And from here, all I have to do is go ahead and start the API, and we'll see that 204, no content is going to be sent back to us. So we're well on our way to actually see what it looks like when this is working. If I can change screens really quickly, I'm going to go ahead and start a connection. That way I'm able to visualize this information that we're going to be sending to the MQTT broker. So as I click connect, you see that everything is started. I want to add a new topic subscription, and I want to click and add demo subscribe to. The reason I've chosen to do that is because that is going to be the path that we set up within the actual definition itself. If we scroll down, the demo MQTT. So as I go to push the data, I'm going to click send. And this data that we have right here in this body is going to be sent over. And as we switch screens, we'll notice that the device ID and the sensor value is going to be included in what we can visualize in the MQTT client. And what I'll do is I'll actually go back over and say that I want to change this to 124, click send. And then I actually want to do it one more time and do 1234 and click send. And what you'll notice is that we'll get a rate limit exceeded message back. We've reached that one request per 5 seconds. And then I would actually be able to go back and see that the 124 that we've also added has now been included as a part of the client as well. Just going to show you the quick and easy way that we'll have to be able to situate and work with something like MQTT or Kafka. And I do want to point out that the tutorials for this is going to be posted on our community website, as well as the Gravitee workspace for you to access any and all these collections as well. So if you do want to get started and toy around with these, they will be available to you.
Beautiful.
Cool.
Great stuff. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Devian. And I think if I just go and move us to the next slide. Actually, before I do that, I just want to, and I'm going to come back to that eventually in this presentation. As you noticed during Devian's presentation, just to recap what he did, right? He started to create using the management APIs of Gravitee. So you can obviously use any CI/CD tool or HTTP client, curl, whatever, to orchestrate what is going on the management side of Gravitee. So in this case, Devian used the underlying APIs of Gravitee to actually create an API, create a plan to secure that API, and then he exposed the API also using a management APIs before he started to invoke it. An actual API that he created, of course, was an underlying MQTT broker exposed on the Gravitee gateway as a REST API. He could have selected to expose it as a webhook API, as server-sent events, as WebSocket, and other technologies that he may seem fit. But in this case, he selected HTTP so that you could inject data using an HTTP post request. Now, as you notice, Devin used Postman, and as he said, we will be sharing and are sharing those tutorials and collections for anyone to get started with this new v4 definition on the 3.20 and 3.19. What the team is currently building out is the user interfaces, the console, the developer portal, the policy studio, all the capabilities in Gravitee that you today are used to for managing your APIs. We are currently revamping for making it compatible with this new event 4.0.0 definition. So I'm going to come to that later on. I just wanted to call it out already now that if you're someone that is not comfortable with using REST APIs or management APIs or Kubernetes tools and instead want to prefer a user interface to go about managing and creating your APIs, that is something that we are investing a lot on at the moment to be released in not too long distance. So speaking of how you can deploy and manage your APIs in Gravitee, leads us to the Gravitee Kubernetes operator, which is as part of 3.20, now in version 0.4.0. So when you use Gravitee, traditionally, if you look back in the last couple of years, you basically had two options. So either you use the user interface to view your APIs, create APIs, manage APIs, secure APIs, expose APIs, and every action as part of your lifecycle management of your APIs. Or you might use the underlying REST APIs of Gravitee, what we call the management APIs, which is exactly what Devin just did. So every action that you take in the UI obviously can be done by invoking the underlying backend REST APIs. Some customers, some users prefer to have that as part of their way, for example, to go into production, to version control, to make an infrastructure as code or GitOps approach to how they declare their APIs and the different actions. Now, what we are announcing as part of our Kubernetes operator is for developers that prefer to work in a completely cloud-native Kubernetes environment that do not even want to invoke APIs on a management API. Instead, they only want to describe stuff in what is known as Kubernetes custom resource definitions, or CRD. They would like to specify what an API looks like, how it operates in a YAML file, and deploy that directly into Kubernetes. So that is also now something that Gravitee supports as part of our Gravitee Kubernetes operator. Not a bad product name, I have to say, Gravitee. So what is the Gravitee Kubernetes operator? So it's a component that listens to Kubernetes custom resource definition files, so CRDs. Currently, the CRDs that Gravitee support is the management context used to describe the actual management component and backend component of Gravitee. It's API definition, which is, as Devin will show you in a few minutes, the actual YAML file that you can work directly in Kubernetes with to define and describe your Gravitee API. And it's API resource. So for those that are comfortable with Gravitee APIs have a dependency sometimes on resources. Could be cache, like Redis, could be OAuth2, like Gravitee or Okta, and could also be another type of resource. And with Gravitee today, you have to tightly couple those resources to APIs. But as part of this latest release this quarter, we are creating an API resource CRD that allows you to define once, for example, your OAuth2 resource or your caching resource, and then reuse that same resource across multiple Gravitee APIs or API definitions. This release, we also announced support of Kubernetes secrets. So if you have sensitive information as part of your YAML files, as part of your API definition files, you can inject secrets from the Kubernetes secrets component into those so that you don't have to disclose them, for example, in a GitHub or GitLab or another kind of sourcing tool. As Devin will show you, we also have the ability now to generate and create these CRDs and API definitions from within an existing Gravitee API using the UI. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Devian, to walk us through the new user interface and how you can take an existing API and expose it into a CRD that you can manage directly inside Kubernetes.
Lovely. Cool. So the first thing, again, is I'll point out the UI that's been revamped and updated. Looks amazing. So you'll notice everything's going to be pretty much the same if you're familiar with Gravitee today, but you'll be able to access the APIs naturally like so. Every API that I've defined within Gravitee, uploaded within Gravitee, potentially currently leveraged within the Gravitee portal, I would be able to see and access right here. And I could even potentially add APIs and have those uploaded into Gravitee as well. What we'll do is we'll focus on the credit card anomalies detection API that we have here. And if I were looking to go down the road of exporting this from what I've created within Gravitee, I would just click the export button, which I see right here. We have the Gravitee API definition button, which I could go through the process of exporting this. But what we're going to focus on is the CRD API definition. It's as simple as going in, having everything already defined for you for the API that you've created and clicking export. And what that will do is actually generate a YAML file at the bottom. If I change a couple of screens over, this is actually going to be what that would look like. So again, being able to see the API version, anything from a spec standpoint. The biggest things is as we go through and configure flows that might sit on the requests and responses for this API, I would be able to see those flows as they're created in this section like so. And then as I scroll down, the concept of plans, which we talked about a little bit during the MQTT section, how an individual is actually able to access an API, we would see that the plans would also be associated to the API as well. So it's pretty much going to take everything that you're looking for and export it into the YAML file that we're seeing here. That way, if you did want to come in and update things and potentially re-import, you could manage it directly out of this file. As a matter of fact, we have a lot of customers that like to do that today. Maybe over half of our customers like to manage everything from an infrastructure as code standpoint and typically live and die by the YAML files that we're seeing here. So there are going to be more tutorials posted on this, on how we would use these, how it would look to import them, but wanted to make sure we had a picture painted for us on what that would look like.
Beautiful. Awesome, Devian. And to wrap that up in terms of the Gravitee Kubernetes operator, now, obviously what Devian could decide to do now is he could delete that API that he exported from that was originally managed by the database and the management API of Gravitee. And he can say, well, actually, I'm going to take this YAML file, the CRD file, I'm going to go into Kubernetes, I'm going to run kubectl apply, and I'm going to have Kubernetes launching this CRD file, and then for the Gravitee Kubernetes operator to take it and manage it. Now, one important thing to point out, if you do that, if you are deploying CRD files into Gravitee, it means that in the management API or in the UI that Devin just showed you, you wouldn't be able to edit your API. You wouldn't be able to change the name or change any other metadata of your API, because the source of truth for that API is that YAML file that may sit in your GitHub or somewhere else. So that's an important architectural difference between a Gravitee Kubernetes operator and managing your APIs with the management API / the UI, that you're moving the source of truth outside potentially of Gravitee, which obviously has a lot of pros in that you can have a source of truth being in your Git repository, but it also has some implication in terms of the capabilities that you can leverage on the UI side. Okay, so Gravitee obviously has a product called Alert Engine, which is an enterprise product. It's used by customers to provide SLA information, for example, and if you have an API that you as an API owner or manager are exposing to your end users, and you need to make sure that the uptime is 99%, or that over the weekend, if you have any issues around 500 error codes, that you'll get a Slack notification, or that if the content of the messages are starting to look a bit suspicious, that you have someone to be able to monitor and alert that. And that's basically what Alert Engine provides you. Now, Alert Engine 2.0, so a major release of Alert Engine for Gravitee, we did that because we wanted to improve dramatically the performance and scalability for customers deploying Alert Engine. Because as you grow your usage of APIs and the consumption of APIs, you start to have more and more APIs, of course, and more triggers and APIs and events being sent. So we wanted to make sure that we really had an optimized memory consumption for running a lot of different alerts and triggers. So trigger is basically a kind of a rule for when an alert should happen, given a different conditions and time windows and so forth. And I'm happy to announce that with Alert Engine 2.0, we have a 24x more performant alert engine runtime. So it's able to handle 24 times more the triggers and alerts on the same resources as it did previously. So I have a sizing and performance guide here. It's part of our official documentation. It allows you to understand with different compute and memory architectures how many triggers and how many events and alerts with Gravitee you expect that to handle without having any challenges. Another major thing that we introduced is support for third-party applications. So traditionally, Alert Engine for Gravitee is used by API management and access management to send alerts. So in access management could be, for example, if you have too many single sign-on failures or suspicious activity with MFA, Alert Engine can alert on maybe Slack or through webhooks or mail or whatever it might be about this behavior. And as I mentioned on API management, you can configure SLAs and monitor your infrastructure and so forth with Alert Engine. But there's been customers that have been asking to use Alert Engine outside of Gravitee API and access management, and that's now possible. So you can actually build your own applications that have different use cases, maybe outside of the API world, that is leveraging Alert Engine for the actual triggers and sending out alerts to different channels using our flexible channels support with things like Slack and webhooks and so forth. So that's an exciting release for us and for our customers in terms of the performance and kind of broadening what you can actually do with Alert Engine. So final thing in terms of the 320 release, it's actually a pretty big release, and I'm not going to have time to go through every single feature that we have announced. Two of the things that I just wanted to point out, though, is subscription message filtering policy and quality of service. So if we take a use case like Kafka or MQTT, where you want to have the Gravitee gateway exposing a Kafka topic or an HiveMQ queue as in Devion's demo. As I mentioned, Devion did an HTTP REST demo on top of MQTT on the gateway. You could as well create, for example, webhook or server-sent events or WebSockets. One of the common use cases that we're getting is you want to expose your event-driven architectures as webhook, where someone can go into the developer portal of Gravitee, they can discover an asynchronous API like a webhook API, they can register and get approved to access it, they can fill in their callback URL, so the actual endpoint that they own, where Gravitee Gateway will call as soon as there's an update on that underlying source, whether it's an MQTT or Kafka or something else. But some of those consumers that are registering want to have the ability to provide a filter and say, actually, I'm only interested if the region or the temperature or the currency or whatever metadata meets a particular condition, to keep the stress on my application to a minimum and only make sure I listen to events that I really, really care about. So maybe in the same Kafka topic, you'd have multiple consumers listening over webhooks, but depending on their filters, they might want to receive a different type of information. And that's something now we support with the subscription message filtering policy in Gravitee. One important thing to note is that it's up to the API producer to respect that filter. So the subscription message filtering policy has to be opted in by the API producer, and it could be configured either to respect the subscriptions by the consumers and their filters, or it could be used for any other type of other expression. Maybe I want to say as an API producer that based on your country or based on your plan, whether you're to the gold plan or silver plan or whatever it might be, you're going to get different type of messages. So you can override that filter as an API producer and decide whether or not you want to respect the consumer's subscriptions filter. Another thing that is, of course, very important in an event-driven world is quality of service. So if I give you an example, so let's say that we are using Kafka and exposing it as a server-sent events. For those that are not comfortable with server-sent events, it's basically an HTTP-based bidirectional asynchronous web communication that is a server-side push technology, so quite similar to WebSocket, but only pushing from server to client. Now, let's say that you're a consumer, you're building a website, and you want to get updates from Gravitee that is getting data from a Kafka topic. So using server sent events to maybe show stock valuation updates in real time in a ticker in a website. So using server sent events to in real time get updates from Gravitee whenever there's a change on a particular stock, for instance. Now, let's say that you're missing a message because of something happening in your client application, you're losing that message. Server sent events by default has a header that I believe goes around something like last message event ID or similar that Gravitee is respecting and generating for. So if we are seeing that the header value for that field is not the latest message that we're getting from the offset in Kafka, based on what you as an API producer set the quality of service to, we might, for example, replay that message. So you can do exactly as once, you can do at least once best effort and other types of quality of service with Gravitee. But as an API producer, the quality of service you can set on your API depends on the support that Gravitee can use on the underlying technology. So for example, with Kafka, we can use the offset technology. And it also depends on how you expose your API. So if you use, for example, REST or webhook or server sent events, there's probably ways for Gravitee to, for example, using the header that is out of the box with server sent events, to have a default way of being able to replay messages and no confirm acknowledgement and stuff like that. But if you're using WebSocket, for example, we wouldn't be able to do that as WebSocket doesn't have a concept of replaying messages or telling someone what the latest message received was. So it really depends on how you're exposing API and what you're exposing, but quite an exciting thing to support replays and other type of architectures through quality of service. So as I kind of hinted earlier, we do have a lot of work going on by our brilliant team to be able to provide a great and redefined API user experience on top of this new 4.0 definition. So in a no too long away future, you'll be able to do the use case that Devian showed us using the console of Gravitee in addition to the Kubernetes operator or to the underlying REST APIs to create your APIs, to use policies, to expose them in a portal, and so forth. So that's something obviously that we're extremely excited about to share with you once it's ready. So that's what we had for 3.0. It's been a very interesting quarter for Gravitee, and obviously it's a very exciting year for us as we're growing, as we're creating and innovating in this exciting area. If you want to learn more, my colleague Alex is sharing links, there we go, into the comment sections and to whatever medium you're streaming from to read more about the 3.20 release. We have a blog post. Some of the stuff that Devian took you through, we have a lot of tutorials in the works and currently released for MQTT and for Kafka. We have a white paper together with HiveMQ, which is a managed service for MQTT, on how you can use Gravitee and MQTT together for optimizing IoT use cases and get started with event-native API management. We have the same using with Kafka. How can you take your Kafka streams and monetize them, get value, secure them with something like Gravitee and event-native API management. And of course, Gravitee is an open company. We do share a lot of our roadmap publicly. We're very excited about getting input from existing customers, open source users, any user that is looking at Gravitee. So feel free to reach out to us with feedback, with suggestions, with comments, and yeah, stay tuned for new tutorials from our team to get started with some of these use cases. So I think we can take questions if there are questions in the chat. So I think there's a fair amount of people that have joined in through different mediums. So excited to have been speaking to all of you. I'll give a few minutes for any questions that might pop up in the chats. And if not, I'm gonna obviously thank you so much for your time, but I'll give it a few more seconds to see if there's anyone about to kind of type away something exciting. There's Alex calling for the same. Devian, any final words for you as we wait to see if there's any questions coming in?
No, like you said, really exciting quarter, and thanks for letting me participate in the live stream here.
My pleasure, Devian. Okay, it looks like it was a very clear presentation, so that's fantastic. As I mentioned, we have a community forum. We have an open portal on our website with a roadmap where you can immediately suggest feedback that goes straight to the product management team here at Gravitee. And of course, you can reach out to Devian or anyone else in the Gravitee team for a demonstration or feedback or help. Then speaker, sorry, I shouldn't shout out your name. Sorry about that. You can update to 3.20 at the moment. It's been around for almost 3 weeks now. Sorry, 2 weeks, the release. So yes, it should be possible to update your Gravitee installations using Helm charts. If there's any challenges with updating your Gravitee version, reach out through the community or to your Gravitee representative, whether that's a customer success manager, making sure that we're there for you to help you out. But yes, that should be possible to do right now. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, good. I'm not in a breach of any GDPR there, so thanks for that. Okay, and George, you just shared the community link. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you more for the next quarterly update and hopefully before that. Again, thanks Devian, thanks Alex for hosting, and I look forward to see what you build with Gravitee. Bye-bye.
Bye.